In the late 1970s, a normal council house in North London became the centre of a haunting that caught everyone's attention. It all began with furniture moving around on its own for reasons no one could explain. Then, toys started flying across rooms, and before long, an 11-year-old girl was speaking in a voice that sounded nothing like her own. Police officers said they saw it happen, and journalists took photos they couldn't explain. The first people on the scene were paranormal investigators who even camped inside the house for months. Some people swore it was a hoax, while others believed it was proof of the supernatural. However, what happened at 284 Green Street became known as the Enfield Poltergeist, which some of us now refer to as the Conjuring. 50 years later, many people still argue about what exactly happened in that house. So let's find out. In 1977, Peggy Hodgson was a single mother trying to raise her 4 children in a modest council house at 284 Green Street, Enfield, in North London. Life wasn't easy. Peggy had recently separated from her husband and money was tight. She lived with her daughters, Janet, who was 11 at the time, and Margaret, who was 13, along with her 2 younger sons, Johnny, 10, and Billy, 7. They were a working-class family living in a cramped 2-storey home provided by the council, not a place anyone expected to become one of the world's most famous paranormal case studies. The first signs were easy to brush off, little things you could blame on an old house. It was just knocking at first, soft thuds inside the walls. Peggy figured it was the neighbours, maybe the pipes acting up. But the sounds kept getting louder and they didn't go away. Soon the knocks were echoing through the small bedrooms at night, right when the kids were trying to sleep. The family tried to ignore it, but the disturbances only grew. By late August 1977, the strange activity was no longer easy to dismiss. Furniture started moving by itself, with drawers sliding out of dressers and chairs scraping slowly across the floor. One night, Peggy watched her daughter's bed shake as if someone she couldn't see was trying to lift it. The children said their toys were being thrown across the room, and Janet and Margaret seemed to take the brunt of it, often crying out in fear when the noises and movements became too much. Peggy was skeptical at first. She didn't believe in ghosts or poltergeists. As a mother raising 4 children on her own, she thought the kids might be playing tricks. But she quickly realised the disturbances were beyond what her children could fake. One night, she entered their bedroom and saw a heavy chest of drawers move across the floor, sliding several feet before coming to a stop. She tried to push it back into place, but it resisted, as if something unseen was holding it. Night after night, the family reported loud bangs, knocking on the walls, and objects thrown across rooms. Neighbours who visited the house said they too heard the strange noises. In one account, a neighbour claimed to hear loud knocking when no one else was near the walls. Eventually, Peggy felt she had no choice but to call the police. On the night of September 10th, 1977, 2 officers from the Enfield Police arrived at 284 Green Street. One of them, WPC Carolyn Heaps, later gave a statement that became one of the earliest official records of the haunting. While inside the house, Heaps witnessed a chair slide across the living room floor on its own. She reported that it moved about 3 to 4 feet before stopping. She examined the chair for wires or any obvious cause, but found nothing. The event was officially noted in her written report. For a case often accused of being staged by children, the police statement added credibility that something strange was truly happening inside the Hodgson home. Even with police involvement, there wasn't much they could do. The officers concluded there was no crime and no immediate danger they could address. But word of the bizarre events spread quickly, and the Hodgson family became the focus of intense local interest. Soon after the police visit, Peggy contacted the press, hoping someone could provide answers. The Daily Mirror was the first newspaper to respond. A photographer, Graham Morris, visited the house and was one of the earliest journalists to witness activity. During his time there, he reported seeing marbles and toys thrown across the room without anyone touching them. According to him, a Lego brick shot through the air and struck him on the forehead, leaving a visible mark. He took photos of the children and the house, some of which later became famous. Morris admitted he went in skeptical, but left disturbed by what he had seen. Within days, the Hodgsons' small council house became a media hotspot. Journalists, photographers, and curiosity seekers crowded outside, hoping to get a glimpse of the so-called poltergeist activity. Headlines in the tabloids sensationalized the events, framing the Hodgsons as victims of a violent haunting. Honestly, it is hard to imagine what Peggy was going through. The media attention was intense. She had reached out for help, but instead, she and her kids ended up in the middle of a circus. Reporters doubted her, neighbours gossiped, and suddenly the Hodgsons were under a spotlight for something they barely understood. At the same time, the coverage brought investigators and experts into the house, which meant the Enfield case was documented more than almost any other haunting of the time. And as the spotlight grew brighter, so did the activity inside the house. Maurice Gross, an investigator with the Society for Psychical Research, said he saw furniture respond to questions, as if an unseen force was in control. Witnesses claimed it was not small movements, but whole pieces sliding several feet across the floor. Kitchen items were also affected. Witnesses claimed to see spoons bending without physical contact, reminiscent of the spoon-bending tricks made famous by Uri Geller, though in this case no performer was involved. On other occasions, spoons were thrown violently across the room. Curtains were seen twisting around themselves, sometimes winding so tightly that it was difficult to untangle them afterward. Neighbours and visitors confirmed seeing the fabric move as though someone was yanking it, even when no one was nearby. The focus of much of the activity was Janet, the 11-year-old daughter. She appeared to be at the centre of many of the disturbances. Investigators noted that when she was in the room, activity was more likely to occur. The most dramatic claims involved levitation. Janet herself reported that she felt as though invisible hands were trying to lift her out of bed. On several occasions, she was said to have been thrown from her bed to the floor. Photographic evidence was produced to support these claims. Graham Morris captured a sequence of images showing Janet apparently airborne. In the photographs, she appears to be leaping, or being hurled from her bed, with her body extended in midair. Supporters of the case argued the photos showed genuine levitation, with Janet pulled upward by forces she couldn't control. Critics later suggested she was simply jumping from the bed. Regardless of interpretation, the photos became iconic images of the case and were widely reproduced in newspapers and later documentaries. This is where things started to get really strange. Investigators said that when Janet went into these trance-like states, she would speak in a deep, gravelly voice that sounded nothing like her. The voice called itself Bill, later known as Bill Wilkins, and claimed he had once lived in the house. He even described how he died, supposedly from a brain hemorrhage, while sitting in a chair in the living room. The voice phenomena were recorded extensively. Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair captured hours of tape recordings of Janet speaking in this deep, rasping male tone. The sound was so rough that it caused concern for Janet's throat, yet doctors noted her vocal cords showed no signs of damage. Speech pathologists who later analysed the recordings argued that the voice could be produced using false vocal cords, but they admitted it would be extremely difficult for a child to maintain for extended stretches. Some of the tapes capture the voice speaking simultaneously with Janet's normal voice, suggesting complex ventriloquism or a dual vocal production that puzzled researchers. Investigators asked the Bill Wilkins voice direct questions, and it responded with information that seemed beyond Janet's knowledge. The most serious case came when details of a former resident named Bill Wilkins were confirmed by his son. As the weeks passed, the recordings multiplied. The guttural voice sometimes laughed, sometimes cursed, and often spoke in short, clipped answers. These recordings turned out to be the most significant piece of evidence the investigators had. For Psychical Research, one of the oldest organisations in Britain devoted to investigating paranormal claims. When reports from the Daily Mirror circulated of furniture flying, children levitating, and guttural voices filling the rooms of 284 Green Street, the Society sent two of its members to examine what was happening. These men were Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair, names that would become permanently linked to the Enfield case. Maurice Gross was the first to arrive. He was in his early 50s at the time, a relatively new member of the Society for Psychical Research. Before becoming an investigator, Gross had worked in advertising and was known for his technical skills, especially with cameras and recording equipment. He was not a lifelong ghost hunter, but had developed a strong interest in the supernatural, following a personal tragedy. In 1976, just a year before the Enfield disturbances, his teenage daughter Janet was killed in a motorcycle accident. Not long after her death, Gross and his wife reported experiencing strange occurrences in their own home. Yeah, you guessed it. The same events as before. He spent countless nights inside the Hodgsons' council house, often sleeping on their sofa or staying awake through the early hours to monitor activity. He brought along cameras, tape recorders and notepads, determined to capture and document everything that happened. Gross was thorough and relentless, noting every knock, every object that moved, every unexplained sound. His files eventually grew to include hundreds of hours of recordings and thousands of pages of notes. Soon after Gross's involvement, another figure joined him, Guy Lyon Playfair. Playfair was a more established member of the Society for Psychical Research, with a background that gave him credibility beyond Britain. He had worked as a journalist and author, and had spent time in Brazil studying poltergeist cases and psychic phenomena. He was considered an experienced researcher, known for his careful observations and willingness to publish his findings. Unlike Gross, who was driven by a personal connection, Playfair approached the case with the mindset of a writer and investigator. He wanted to study the events, document them, and eventually present them to the public. Together, Gross and Playfair formed the investigative core of the Enfield case. They set up a system of nightly vigils inside the house. The two men often rotated shifts, one keeping watch while the other rested, so that activity would not go unobserved. They stationed themselves in bedrooms and hallways, sometimes with the children, sometimes with the mother, and sometimes alone. Their role was not only to witness the disturbances, but also to provide comfort and reassurance to a family that was increasingly under siege. During these vigils, the investigators reported seeing much of what the Hodgsons had described. Gross claimed to witness chairs and beds moving unaided, small objects flying across the room, and even Janet levitating. Both men reported hearing the strange guttural voice phenomena that seemed to come from Janet. They recorded many of these instances on tape, using reel-to-reel recorders and cassette decks. They also attempted controlled tests. For example, they asked the voice questions that only an intelligent presence could answer, and they tested whether the voice could continue while Janet's mouth was filled with water or tape. According to their notes, in some instances the voice still emerged. As investigators, both men tried to apply some structure to what was happening. They logged times and dates of each event, noting which witnesses were present and how long the activity lasted. Their catalogues of events became one of the most detailed records ever made of a supposed haunting. Gross in particular was tireless, eventually gathering more than 2,000 separate incidents during the 2 years the case ran. Even though the investigators tried to stay neutral, the case quickly pulled them in. For Maurice Gross especially, it became personal. He had lost his daughter not long before, and that left him with a strong need to believe in some kind of life after death. Years later, some of his colleagues suggested this may have made him more willing to see the events in Enfield as real. Playfair was somewhat more cautious, but even he admitted that the sheer volume of phenomena he witnessed convinced him that something extraordinary was happening. He later published a book, This House is Haunted, in which he described the 2 years he spent working on the case. In it, he made clear that while the Hodgson children were sometimes caught exaggerating or playing tricks, the majority of the events could not be explained so easily. Over time, their involvement grew into an obsession. Gross, in particular, spent nearly every night at the Hodgson home for over a year, missing time with his own family. He became a near-permanent fixture in the house, to the point that neighbours and even the Hodgsons themselves sometimes treated him like another member of the household. Playfair also invested significant time, though he occasionally returned to his home and writing commitments. By late 1977 and into 1978, the two men had become the public face of the Enfield case. When journalists and TV crews reported on the haunting, it was often Gross and Playfair who gave interviews, presented evidence, and defended the Hodgsons from accusations of fakery. Their reputations became bound to the events at Green Street. For Gross, the case remained his lifelong cause, something he defended until his death in 2006. For Playfair, it became the defining work of his career as a paranormal investigator. But for the media, it was only the beginning. The first outlet to cover the case in detail was the Daily Mirror. Its photographer, Graham Morris, had already captured some of the earliest images of the children in distress and claimed he personally witnessed objects being thrown across rooms. His photos and accounts made for sensational headlines, and within days the Hodgson's house was a focal point of national attention. From there, other newspapers rushed to cover the story. The British tabloids, always eager for dramatic copy, ran pieces describing levitating children and London's most haunted house. Headlines played up the most shocking details: toys flying through the air, furniture moving unaided, and a mysterious voice growling through the throat of 11-year-old Janet. Articles rarely held back, often presenting the family as trapped in a nightmarish haunting. Some reports ran side by side with Skeptics quotes, while others leaned entirely into the supernatural angle. It wasn't just print media. Television quickly followed. The BBC and ITV sent crews to Enfield to film segments. Though not all crews captured direct evidence of paranormal activity, their footage of the Hodgson children, the investigators, and the house itself brought the haunting into living rooms across Britain. One of the most widely circulated clips showed Janet speaking in the gravelly, male Bill Wilkins voice, while sitting next to investigator Maurice Gross. Broadcast interviews like these gave the public first-hand glimpses of what was going on inside the home. Reporters and photographers were camped out right outside the Hodgsons' little council house, filling the street with vans, cameras and crowds. Neighbours got fed up with the noise and traffic, because journalists were there day and night. And it wasn't just the press. Curious people from all over showed up, hoping to see something for themselves. Some even knocked on Peggy's door, asking to come in, while others just hung around outside, trading rumours about what was going on inside. The children bore the brunt of the attention. At school, classmates teased and bullied Janet and Margaret, mocking them for being the ghost girls. Janet, who was already at the centre of the disturbances, became the most targeted. Teachers also had difficulty treating the situation neutrally, with some quietly suspecting the children of mischief. For Margaret, Johnny and Billy, the unwanted celebrity status turned daily life into a struggle. They could not escape the story, whether at school, in the neighbourhood, or even while trying to shop locally with their mother. Neighbours in Enfield grew divided. Some supported the family, insisting they too had heard strange noises or witnessed unusual activity while visiting the house. Others became suspicious, believing the Hodgsons were faking the events to gain publicity. The constant stream of reporters didn't help. Green Street, usually a quiet residential road, now looked like a permanent media camp, and neighbours resented the disruption. Rumours spread that the Hodgsons were being paid for their cooperation with newspapers, though in reality, the family remained financially strained throughout the ordeal. The intensity of the coverage meant that every new development inside the house was quickly reported nationwide. When Janet was photographed appearing to levitate from her bed, the images ran in newspapers across Britain and abroad. When the strange Bill Wilkins voice emerged, recordings were broadcast on the radio and snippets played on television. This immediate amplification magnified the impact of every incident, ensuring the story stayed in the public eye for months. The media attention did bring investigators, witnesses, and plenty of documentation, but it also put a huge strain on the family. Peggy often looked worn down in interviews, speaking quietly about just wanting it all to stop. While the family was just trying to cope, everyone on the outside was busy arguing about what it all really meant. Well, there are two sides to it. The Enfield case split people into two camps: those who believed it revealed evidence of something paranormal, and those who thought it was nothing more than trickery, amplified by credulous investigators and a sensationalist press. This clash between believers and skeptics turned the Hodgson home into both a haunted house and a laboratory. Paranormal researchers, most notably Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair of the Society for Psychical Research, approached the disturbances as phenomena that could be recorded, catalogued, and possibly proven. They carried cameras, audio recorders, and notepads into 284 Green Street almost every night. Playfair would later recall the sheer volume of notes, filling dozens of binders with dates, times, and descriptions of knocks, bangs, and object movements. Gross often had his tape recorder running, capturing hundreds of hours of audio. They were not alone in this approach. Visiting researchers from other groups occasionally brought in specialised equipment: thermometers to check sudden temperature drops, cameras with flash units, and, in one case, devices intended to measure electromagnetic fluctuations in the house. Nothing conclusive came from these efforts, but the accumulation of data, sound recordings, photographs and signed witness statements, was itself unusual compared to most poltergeist stories, which rarely leave behind such a paper trail. The most striking focus of scientific attention was Janet's strange possession voice. On multiple occasions, she spoke in a gravelly, guttural male tone, claiming to be a man named Bill Wilkins, who allegedly had died in the house years earlier. Recordings captured exchanges where this voice answered questions, sometimes for minutes at a time, while Janet's lips barely seemed to move. These tapes were played for pathologists and speech experts, who tried to determine whether a young girl could physically produce such a sound. One of the experts consulted was Dr. Peter Fenwick, a neuropsychiatrist with a reputation for investigating near-death and paranormal experiences. He listened to the tapes and concluded the vocalizations were not impossible, but extremely unusual for a child to sustain. Other speech pathologists noted that speaking in that register placed enormous strain on the vocal cords. Some even said it would be impossible to maintain for longer than a few minutes without damaging the throat. Yet recordings showed Janet keeping up the voice for extended periods, sometimes with her mouth closed. Still, not everyone was buying it. Skeptics came up with their own explanations. Some thought Janet was just a gifted mimic, using a trick called ventricular fold phonation, where the false vocal cords vibrate instead of the real ones to create that deep, rough sound. Performers and ventriloquists sometimes use it, though it's rare in kids. Critics argued that once the voice got attention, Janet might have kept it going, whether she meant to or not. The debate only grew when investigators tried setting up simple tests. In one case, Janet was told to hold water in her mouth while the voice spoke, to prove it wasn't ventriloquism. Accounts of what happened vary. Maurice Grosse said the voice still came through, but skeptics dismissed the experiments as sloppy, since no independent scientists were there to monitor them. Beyond the voice, the physical disturbances were also examined. Objects flying across rooms, toys hurled, and spoons bending were, according to believers, recorded under watchful eyes. Grosse and Playfair insisted they often saw items move without any child nearby, yet critics countered with simple possibilities: children throwing objects when no one was looking, or investigators misinterpreting normal accidents during chaotic moments. Photographs such as those of Janet appearing to levitate above her bed became iconic pieces of evidence. Supporters said they showed her being thrown into the air by an invisible force. Detractors said the images merely showed a girl mid-jump, perhaps enjoying the attention. The ambiguity in the photos meant they could be used by both camps to support their conclusions. Another angle skeptics pursued was psychological. Some psychologists suggested that the Hodgson children, particularly Janet, were under immense stress, living in a broken home with a single mother struggling financially. Such stress, they argued, could lead to attention-seeking behaviour, even unconscious trickery. This line of thought framed the events not as supernatural, but as a family under pressure, acting out in ways that spiralled out of control once adults and media became involved. Even within the Society for Psychical Research, there was division. While Grosse and Playfair stood by the authenticity of most events, other members expressed reservations. Some thought the investigators were too emotionally involved to remain objective, pointing especially to Grosse's deep investment after losing his daughter. Some people within the organisation said that while some incidents might remain unexplained, much of what was reported could be dismissed as exaggeration or outright fraud by the children, but the biggest surprise was a presence that wanted to be heard. Of everything that happened at 284 Green Street, nothing grabbed more attention than the strange voice that called itself Bill Wilkins. Unlike the knocks or the moving furniture, it was a presence with a name, a backstory, and even a personality. And it made itself heard through Janet Hodgson. The voice first appeared through Janet Hodgson. In late 1977, while investigators Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair were staying at the house, Janet began producing guttural, male-sounding speech. The voice introduced itself as Bill, and soon expanded into longer conversations. The tone was harsh, rasping, and carried none of the qualities of a child's normal speech. Over weeks and months, the voice revealed details about its supposed identity. It claimed to be a man named Bill Wilkins, who had once lived in the very same house at 284 Green Street. According to the voice, he had died there after suffering a brain hemorrhage. It described the death vividly, saying he went blind, collapsed in the chair in the living room, and passed away. They were already used to Janet producing strange sounds, but now the situation shifted into what looked like direct communication. Gross and Playfair recorded hours of these conversations. Sometimes they engaged the voice in question and answer sessions, pressing it for details about life, death, and the supposed memories of this Bill Wilkins. The turning point came when researchers managed to track down information about a man of that name. It was discovered that indeed, a Bill Wilkins had once lived at 284 Green Street and had died there years earlier. Even more compelling, his death matched the voice's account. A brain hemorrhage suffered in the living room. The detail was later corroborated by Wilkins's son. When contacted, he confirmed that his father had passed away in precisely that way, describing how he had collapsed in the chair downstairs. This stunned both the investigators and the Hodgson family, who had no prior knowledge of the man. There was nothing in public records or local gossip that the Hodgson children could have easily known. This revelation raised the central question. How could Janet, an 11-year-old girl, possess such specific knowledge about the house's history? To the Hodgsons, this seemed to confirm that their haunting had a real, identifiable spirit behind it. To Gross, who was already emotionally committed to the case, it added weight to his belief that they were witnessing genuine paranormal contact. The voice phenomenon was documented extensively. Recordings survive in which Bill Wilkins speaks about ordinary topics, cracks jokes, and argues with the investigators. Sometimes the voice taunted the family or used coarse language. Other times it answered personal questions, as if it truly were another consciousness speaking through Janet. Speech experts who listened to the tapes noted the strain required to produce the sound. The vocal quality suggested Janet was using her false vocal cords, a method uncommon in children. Maintaining that growling pitch for long stretches should have caused pain or damage, yet Janet seemed able to sustain it without lasting harm. Doubters countered with alternative explanations. They argued that Janet could have learned about Wilkins through subconscious means, perhaps overhearing local talk, or through chance exposure to details about the house's history. They also suggested the investigators may have unintentionally fed information back to Janet during questioning, which she then repeated as if it came from Bill. Memory contamination, they argued, could explain how accurate details were produced without conscious deceit. Still, the fact that Wilkins' son independently verified the circumstances of his father's death gave believers a powerful point. For Gross and Playfair, this was evidence that the voice was not a fabrication, but a genuine link to the past occupant of the house. To them, Janet was either channeling or possessed by the spirit of Bill Wilkins. Not all researchers were convinced. Some who visited the house during this period suggested that Janet might have been play acting or performing under pressure. One of the earliest documented cases of fakery involves spoons. Investigators and visitors noticed on several occasions that Janet and her siblings were seen bending spoons or attempting to manipulate objects when they thought no one was watching. Although spoon bending had already become popularized in the 1970s by stage performers like Uri Geller in the context of the Hodgson's home, it raised questions. There were also times when the strange voice phenomena seemed less than convincing. Witnesses reported catching Janet deliberately speaking in a gruff voice, out of character, when she thought investigators were absent or distracted. These instances fed accusations that the Bill Wilkins voice was nothing more than an elaborate performance. Even Guy Lyon Playfair, one of the main investigators, admitted in his later writings that Janet had on occasion messed about and pretended to create effects herself. Playfair's most quoted line on this subject summed up his stance. Some of it was faked, but not all. He and Maurice Gross argued that while the children sometimes staged incidents, the majority of the disturbances were genuine and beyond the children's capabilities. They reasoned that hoaxes by the girls were usually obvious, almost crude, while the larger events, chairs sliding, heavy furniture moving, or objects flying in front of multiple witnesses, couldn't be explained so easily. Still, the very admission of fakery planted doubt. The strain on the family's mental and emotional health was clear. Janet, only 11 years old, found herself at the center of everything. Night after night, she was watched by strangers, questioned by reporters, recorded by scientists and challenged by skeptics determined to prove her wrong. Under that kind of pressure, it is easy to imagine a child exaggerating or even play acting at times, whether to keep people's attention or simply out of boredom. Her sister Margaret, a little older, later admitted that they sometimes played tricks, but both girls always insisted that while a few things were faked, most of what happened in the house was real and beyond their control. It's worth asking, what would the family actually get out of faking all this? The truth is, not much. They didn't make money from the case when it was happening in the late 1970s. The papers didn't pay them, and the researchers didn't either. If anything, the haunting cost them their privacy and any sense of normal life. About the only thing they might have gained was attention. For the kids, maybe it gave them a way to be noticed, and for Peggy, maybe she let it go on, because it shifted focus away from the constant struggles she was already dealing with. Fame was another factor considered. For a short period, the Hodgsons became household names in Britain. Their case was featured in newspapers, on television, and debated in pubs across the country. The children went from being anonymous school kids to being recognised on the street. Yet this notoriety brought more problems than rewards. Classmates bullied them, neighbours looked at them with suspicion, and many outsiders dismissed them as liars. If their intention was to become beloved celebrities, the outcome didn't match. Some have also looked at survival as a motive. Psychologists who studied the case later suggested that the haunting, real or not, might have been a way for the family to cope. Peggy had just separated from her husband and was under enormous strain trying to raise 4 kids on her own. For the children, especially Janet, there may have been a feeling of being powerless or ignored. Acting out strange disturbances, whether they realised it or not, gave them a way to grab attention, draw adults into their world, and shift the focus away from the stress of their broken home. There's also the influence of the times to think about. The 1970s were full of paranormal stories in newspapers and on television. Poltergeist cases were reported around the world, and movies and books about ghosts were everywhere. The Hodgson kids grew up in that atmosphere, so mimicking what they saw in those stories might have felt natural, especially when every knock and voice brought investigators back into the house and reporters to the front door. Still, none of these explanations really settles the debate. If the kids just wanted attention, why admit to faking only some of it while standing firm that the rest was real? If it was about money, why didn't the family ever cash in on their story? Perhaps these questions are exactly why the story never really went away. When the Society for Psychical Research compiled its files, the case was already being whispered about in circles far outside of North London. Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair had gathered tapes, notes and photographs, and this material began circulating among both believers and critics. Playfair's later book, This House is Haunted, 1980, became the definitive written account from an insider's perspective. He laid out the chronology of disturbances, the voices, the levitations, and the investigators' struggles with hoaxes. The book fueled public interest worldwide, cementing the case as more than just a local curiosity. Grosse, though less of a writer, supported the case through lectures and media appearances, defending the Hodgsons long after the daily headlines disappeared. Beyond the written accounts, the story quickly found its way into broadcast media. The BBC and ITV had already dipped into coverage during the 1970s, but in the decades that followed, the haunting was revisited in multiple documentaries. Programs such as Strange But True, World's Scariest Ghosts Caught on Tape, and later Paranormal Witness all spotlighted Enfield. Each production reinterpreted the case for a new generation, often blending authentic recordings with dramatised recreations. The black and white photos of Janet seemingly mid-air became standard visual shorthand for poltergeist activity. Stage and radio plays also took an interest. The most prominent theatrical adaptation was The Enfield Haunting, first staged in London in 2011, which leaned heavily on Playfair's accounts while dramatising the psychological strain on both the family and the investigators. Radio dramatisations in the BBC's repertoire also explored the voices, weaving original tape snippets with actors' interpretations. These performances blurred entertainment with archive, keeping the haunting alive in cultural memory. Television dramatisation brought the case to an even larger audience. In 2015, Sky Living produced a 3-part miniseries titled The Enfield Haunting, starring Timothy Spall as Maurice Gross and Matthew McFadyen as Guy Lyon Playfair. The series took a more psychological approach, focusing on the bond between Gross and Janet, while dramatising the strange occurrences. Though compressed and stylised, it brought the case back into mainstream conversation. The biggest adaptation came a year later with The Conjuring 2 in 2016. James Wan's Hollywood blockbuster put Ed and Lorraine Warren, the famous American ghost hunters from Amityville, right at the centre of the Enfield story. The thing is, in real life, the Warrens only dropped by the house briefly, and their role was tiny compared to Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair. But the movie blew their part up, turning them into the heroes who saved the family. It was a big stretch from the truth, but it also introduced the Enfield haunting to audiences all over the world. A lot of people came away thinking the Warrens had actually been running the whole show. Critics pointed out the inaccuracies, but by then it didn't matter. The film had cemented Enfield as part of the Conjuring universe and locked it into pop culture history. So at the end of the day, Enfield never really gave us answers. Some of the evidence feels impossible to fake, some of it feels too easy to explain away. And that's why the story still hangs in the middle. The Conjuring 2 turned it into this huge Hollywood story with the Warrens front and centre, which is pretty different from the first Conjuring that stuck closer to their real cases. If you've seen The Conjuring 2, just how different is the movie from this story? Let me know.